Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's GTCS webinar. Today's webinar is titled Dealing with Uncertainty, presented by Claire Lavelle, Director of the Hive of Wellbeing. I'm Fraser Shand, and I work at GTCS as Digital Communications and Events Coordinator. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. We've taken a screenshot of an example of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop in the upper right corner. You're listening in using your computer's speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select phone call in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You can also use this pane if you have any issues with hearing the webinar at any point tonight. Like all of you, we are getting used to working with new technology, so please bear with us if we experience any technical difficulties. For that reason, we are presenting with audio only today. You can submit questions by typing these into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. If there are any questions we don't get around to answering today, we plan to publish a Q&A on our website soon. You can also use this questions pane to raise any technical difficulties you have, and we will do the best we can to try and find a solution for you. I would now like to introduce Sharon Smith and Claire Lavelle to present today's webinar.
Thank you, Fraser. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Sharon Smith and I'm a Senior Education Officer within the Education team at GTC Scotland. Thank you all very much for signing up to this webinar entitled Dealing with Uncertainty. We're delighted that you felt inspired to join us on this stunningly sunny day. We hope that we are able to support you through your own personal journeys in these challenging and difficult times. So it's with great delight and pleasure that I have the opportunity to introduce you to one of our partners, Claire Lavelle, Director of the Hive of Wellbeing, who will deliver today's webinar. For those of you who have already worked with Claire, heard her speak at an event, or even in other webinars for GTC Scotland, she approaches all her work with the well-being of teachers at the heart of what she does and says. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand you over to Claire to begin today's webinar.
Thank you so much, Sharon, and thank you so much to Fraser and colleagues at the GTCS for having me here today. I'm so sorry about the difficulties with the webcam. It's more of a podcast now, Sharon. It's going to be a bit of a chat show, I think, between the two of us.
I'm sure we'll cope.
The webinar today. I'm sure we will cope. I promise you, it's not that I'm in my pajamas today. I genuinely have dressed up for the occasion, but I'm so sorry about these technical difficulties. But I'm absolutely delighted to be here and absolutely delighted that many of you have signed up for this webinar and are able to take some time out from a sunny day, but also a very busy day, I've no doubt, either from the hubs or from the online learning that you're engaged with as you come back to school in this particular week. So my name is Claire Lavelle. I'm a coach. I support educators throughout Scotland. And I work on areas of work-related wellbeing with our educators. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to share some ideas, some strategies, and also to ask you to reflect on some coaching questions as we go through the webinar today to support you in dealing with this topic of dealing with uncertainty. As we go through the slides, I would ask this of you, if you're able to do so. I would ask each of you to just notice what comes up for you. Notice the feelings, the thoughts, and take a note of any kind of thing that you observe regarding your own sense of well-being. Sorry, excuse me 1 second, just trying to move the slide on, beg your pardon. There we go. So taking a note of what you might observe, because noticing is a first step in the practice of then wanting to change what we would prefer to feel and think instead. So a lot of the work I talk about today is going to be around that notion of reframing. So what are we having to deal with right now? There is a lot of uncertainty that we're having to deal with. With the onslaught of coronavirus, our lives were turned upside down almost over a whole weekend as educators. And I think it's a key point to make throughout this webinar that each of us is experiencing our own personal journey with this. And therefore, we're going to see this through our own lens and experience this through our own lens. I suppose for me, an observation I've made is that the kind of paradox of a lockdown to keep us safe is that it led to greater uncertainty and perhaps greater insecurity for us as individuals and as families and as educators with our school communities. We recognise that perhaps within our own families or within our own school communities, there are jobs that are at risk just now, jobs that may be lost. There are lives at risk just now. And we also know as educators that over a weekend, we had to leave our places of safety for those most vulnerable children, as well as all of our children and young people. And we had to leave our children thinking, what will become of them? What will happen to them? Of course, we see the trends of cases and sadly of deaths every single day. It's not just about the trends, it's about every number is a human life, and we feel it deeply. So at this moment, I think we recognise that my well-being is bound up with your well-being, and we all have to stay home to protect one another and our NHS in order to save lives. I also think, though, that perhaps with some of this, there can be some hope and optimism with the prospect of some of the conversations that are being had just now at a political level and at a national level about what might it be to return to normal, or indeed a new normal. But what is certain right now is that the world needs a lot of healing and it needs a lot of love and kindness. So in this kind of context, in this kind of backdrop, I'd like to move us into how do we as educators deal with the uncertainty and the insecurities. I think one of the key things to do, and certainly in the last few weeks when I've been working with clients on coaching sessions, is to ask them to consider what they can focus on in the now and ask themselves the question, what do I need right now? And it might be, I need to go out shopping and I need to keep myself safe. I'm running low on resources. It might be that I need more rest. I need to take naps in the afternoon or as the day goes on. It might be that I need more distraction, or indeed I might need to have much more online connection. But whatever it is, just noticing what we need on a moment-to-moment basis can be really helpful. Because as humans, we need to survive, thrive and strive. And I would say that over the last number of weeks, we've been really focused as individuals and as educators on those three bottom bases of that Maslow's triangle. Strive is a challenge for us just now, and yet it's an expectation of us as educators. But we need to feel safe within this right now in our striving. So there's something about finding a routine that works for us, but being gentle and kind with ourselves around that routine. And perhaps it's more about getting into a rhythm, that in fact you might need to sleep a bit longer one day, get up earlier another day, but finding a rhythm that works best for you. There's also something here about our boundaries when we're working from home, and even if we're working in our hubs, that work time and that home time, we need to be clear about what those boundaries are, those set hours that we make for ourselves. Is it about set times of the day, or is it about a number of hours that we aim to work towards? Also within our homes, looking at the demarcations of workspace and home space, we do need to set ourselves a psychological space to work within, but also to have a safe home space within, where we are with our families, whether we're connecting online or whether we're with our families physically at home. And also there's something here about our expectations. Are you working at your pace, or are you working at someone else's pace? What are your expectations, and be clear about them for yourself, and what is right and what is needed for you just now in order to be able to strive in a way that is safe for you and is not neglecting your basic needs.
Claire, I find that myself, sorry to interrupt you there, but I just wanted to add in there about, that really resonates with me. Certainly the first week of working from home, I found it a challenge with other people setting their pace and their rhythm and it not being the same as mine. So some people working much earlier because they'd woken earlier, and then me not feeling like I was achieving because I wasn't starting work at the same time. So I think it's really important to realise that what works for someone else might not work as well for you, and vice versa.
It's very true. I remember in my very first year as a probationer in the school, my head teacher taking me aside and saying, you know, you may need to work later in the school. Some people come in earlier. You don't need to come in early and leave late. You need to find the way that works for you. And I found that to be a great comfort. It's no different now, just what you're saying. You know how you work best and where you're going to be most productive. And that brings me on to that whole notion of being productive and what it really means. It's interesting just now because in these last few weeks, and even in the conversations we've been having, Sharon, over the last couple of weeks about what it is to be productive, you know, working, what people are saying to me, oh, I find it so hard, I can't get into it, or I'm finding it difficult to get into a good pace. What I find really interesting is that I was having some similar conversations around productivity before lockdown, in that people would say to me, well, these are the goals I've set for myself today, and this is what I wanted to get through. But you know what? I've got to the end of the day and I really don't know what I've done. So there's something here about recognising what it is for yourself to be productive, and maybe a different pace, maybe less hours means that you're more productive working in spurts and concentrated spells rather than lengthening it throughout the whole day. So really helpful that, you know, with what you're saying there, Sharon, around some of this. And I suppose it brings me to this idea of, you know, when we're facing uncertainty, we need to continue to hold on to what makes us human. I think what's been really heartwarming to see is the amount of teachers, school leaders really reaching out in such a human way to their school communities, to their families. And although people are being as clear as they can about the boundaries between home life and school life, I've seen a number of living rooms and kitchens and gardens of teachers and school leaders in this last while on Twitter, just demonstrating the connection that they want to have still with their pupils, bringing them into their homes almost to let them know they are human too. And we need to hold on to those constants of what it is to be human and to stay human at work and at home. You know, I've been listening a lot and I'm very attuned as a coach to people's language. And there's been a lot of war terminology used in our social media and in our media at large. And sometimes I wonder if that's always helpful. And I find that, again, this idea of reframing as a strategy can be really resourceful and support us in moving from that embattled mindset to one of empowerment and freedom. So I saw this on social media, this phrase of, you know, not thinking of ourselves as stuck inside, but thinking of ourselves as safe inside. And another example is that idea of maybe not socially distancing, but physically distancing. You know, when I've been out for walks, my mandatory, I'm not sure it is mandatory, but for the walks that I take of a day, and what's lovely to see is people are making an effort to connect, to smile, to wave, to say hello. So we're not socially distant, but we're physically distant, and we're socially still very connected. I think there's also something here as well about being realistic with what we need now. An observation that I've made, again, just looking at our media and looking at our situation just now, which is an ever-changing landscape. You know, at the beginning of March, or rather, sorry, the middle of March, the end of March, when lockdown kind of began, there was a feeling of grief of people losing their jobs, of people losing roles within our society. And then by mid-April, that grief had moved to one of grief of losing our loved ones or losing people to this sickness. And our priorities perhaps changed and the emphasis changed on what perhaps that collective grief was about. I think there's also something here about being realistic with what we need now and what those needs are. So what we needed to do in schools before is perhaps less of a priority now, but focusing now on what our needs are as educators and also what it is that our pupils need right now. Again, we are hoping that at a physiological level, at a safety level, at that belonging level, we're doing everything we can to ensure that our pupils are looked after. There's also something around access to online learning, that we are not making presumptions about that and that we are reaching out as best we can in every physical way that we can to our pupils who we know won't have access to a computer at all times. And therefore not overwhelming our children and our families with that learning, and looking at getting their feedback on what is manageable is important. But we also need to look again at what we need as educators. When we are physically present, we get feedback all the time about what's happening with our pupils. Some of that feedback we're not always impressed with at times, but it is feedback nonetheless. But we're not physically present. But I wonder if we are still too attached sometimes to our need for that same kind of feedback, or we're too attached to those outcomes. So we may be putting out work for the 30 pupils in our class, but finding out that only 6 of our pupils or less are engaging with the work, and only less than 6 are giving us feedback back on the work that they're doing. So there's something here for me about perhaps needing to reframe my own expectations of what I'll get back and of my attachment to those outcomes. So instead of thinking that I'm putting out this work and I need to get that feedback from the pupils in the same kind of way I would get in the classroom, just recognising that is no longer perhaps possible, but it's not a reflection on who you are as a teacher. It's just that families' priorities may have changed. Things may be going at home that we're not privy to. And therefore, if we can reframe it and say, as an educator, I give not to receive, but I give in order to support. It could be another way to reframe it is, I'm learning how to do this differently all of the time. Every day truly is a school day for me, but I'm continuing to reach out and to meet needs in the best way that I possibly can. So just some thoughts to consider our own attachments to perhaps some of those outcomes.
Claire, have you had any feedback from others about this when you've been speaking to people?
Yeah, I have actually. Again, in the last few weeks, as my coaching clients are moving to online or indeed working in the hubs, just the kind of, I've seen a kind of gradual acceptance that, and I think that's a practice we'll move on to as we move through this webinar today, but that kind of gradual acceptance that it's not business as usual. And people were anxious at the very beginning about not getting that feedback from the pupils, even when they first started to go online. I think there is a bit of a novelty effect as well with pupils engaging in this new way of learning. But they've also got to adjust and to get into their own rhythms. And I did pick up on quite a number of people in coaching conversations and in informal conversations with colleagues about their anxieties around losing that connection through the learning. So it's maybe looking at other ways, and we discussed maybe finding other ways to reach out, to connect. Some of those videos to connect with pupils in a really human way at home have been very helpful, really significant as well for people. So just thinking about the creative ways in which to create, but going back to that idea of I'm here to give, not always to receive, has also been quite resourceful.
Yeah.
Because I think being attached to that outcome and having some unrealistic expectations of what we can do can increase our feelings of anxiety, or indeed our feelings of helplessness at times. And this may be a time to shift a bit of our focus from simply always giving to our classes and our children and thinking about how we can balance that out with giving to ourselves. Anyone who's ever heard me before will hear me talking about you have to give to yourself before you can give to others, and looking after yourself before you can pour from that empty cup, that kind of idea.
Yeah.
And that's in the work of this Professor Paul Gilbert, who talks about the need for self-compassion in order to resource ourselves. Now, Paul Mills, I know he did a webinar, I think it was last week, was it, Sharon, on de-stressing ourselves? And he talked about how stress is part of our threat system. And when we are in that feeling of fight or flight or freeze, which some of us might be feeling just now, we're not able to drive in the same way that we used to, or we're able to in our physical environment of school, because things have really changed. And therefore, in order to resource ourselves to get to striving and to a little bit more driving, we have to find ways to soothe ourselves first and foremost. And in order to soothe ourselves, we need to look at ways in which we bring ourselves to a place of feeling calmer and feeling that we can get back some of that control. So in engaging in different methods such as meditation or deep breathing, or indeed connection with others, even if it's virtual and online, seeing one another's faces, connecting with each other in that human way and picking up on those human visual cues is so important to soothing ourselves. I know there'll be a number of educators who are living alone just now, and therefore, touch, which we're always so take for granted, the hugs and the physicality of being around each other, that unfortunately has had to go. And therefore that online connection is so important to pick up on visual cues. And that's why I'm so sorry today we don't have the webcam. I'm so sorry about
It's so true though, because this, certainly me and my colleagues have really spoken through webcam over the last few weeks. So we've had that visual connection, and having practiced this webinar with you and seeing you, I am really missing that sense of visual connection just now. It's quite tangible for me.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? We really do feel that acutely, because as humans, we are meant to connect in that kind of physical, visual way. So we need to find different ways to soothe ourselves. But I thought at this juncture it might be a good idea to take a bit of a kind of a poll from our participants today about the statement that best fits how people feel just now, to describe how they feel. And what I would ask people to do just now is just to reflect on the statements. And although the statements are worded as I am, it's not about identifying with that ongoing state. It's about how you feel just now, which is always transitory. And just to get a kind of flavour for people just now, checking in with themselves, if that makes sense. Okay to go for just now.
That's the poll live now, so please feel free to answer the questions, and I'll just let you know when it's closing.
Now might be a good time to just remind you that if anyone does have any questions for Claire, you can submit these through the question pane, and we'll do our best to answer them live today. If not, we'll follow up and answer them on our website.
Okay, I'll just give people 5 more seconds and then I'll close the poll. Okay, and just sharing the answers just now, Claire. So we have 51% who are saying that I feel that I am doing enough for my pupils under the circumstances. 24% saying that they were in a good place before lockdown and now they're uncertain. 12% are saying they're out of control with work, especially routine. 11% saying I'm not doing enough for my pupils now, and 3% saying that they don't do enough for their pupils at any time.
Thank you so much for participating in that poll and giving us an idea of some of the feelings that we're enduring at the moment. It's great to see, that amount feeling that they're doing enough for the pupils under these circumstances just now. But I also want to tap into that feeling of just feeling out of control with the work and with the routine just now. I would ask those who have answered on that front just to think about that self-compassion, but also just from tomorrow, just in a very practical way, just to set yourself either 1, 2, or just 3 things that you want to get done tomorrow on the learning, or online learning, or something to do with that interests you and that will motivate you, that you've got an interest in, something that you want to try out, that's something maybe creative that you just want to give a go. And just see where it takes you, because it's all trial and error just now. The word that I think is overused just now, but understandably, is unprecedented. And for you to feel the way that you're feeling just now is possibly very unprecedented. So just giving something a go, and I'll speak more about support that's available as we go through. Also on that idea of letting go of the outcomes for a week. So those who have answered on being in that good place with pupils before lockdown and feeling uncertain now, or feeling that I'm not doing enough for my pupils, just that idea of letting go of those outcomes, letting go of that outcomes just for a week, just trying that out for a week and just seeing where it takes you, and to see what difference it makes to your feelings and the relationship you have with that, and just to notice where you were this week to where you are in a few days' time, and indeed into next week. Because what we focus on and what we practice, it does grow. And I want to just talk now about something that we have, a mechanism in our brains that we have called the reticular activating system, which is part of our kind of primal brain, if you like, the reptilian brain, which again Paul Mills referred to last week. And the reticular activating system is an attentional mechanism, and it allows us to put our focus on things which it thinks at a kind of associated and unconscious level keeps us safe. And we have perhaps an awful lot of recurrent thoughts and habitual thoughts, which throughout our lives perhaps have served to protect us, but which can also be quite negative at times. And our reticular activating system can give us more evidence of these recurrent thoughts and ideas being fulfilled each time. So I've got a friend who one of her kind of themes is that, well, you know, if anything bad's going to happen, it's always going to happen to me. You know, I'll always end up with getting the cold, or I'll always end up having an accident with my car, or I'll always have this. And she's not always correct, but she only focuses on when she is. So there's something there about the thoughts that we have and what we focus on, what we practice will grow. So if we have this thought about, for example, I'm not doing enough, it's about noticing there's that thought again. Have you seen the cartoon just now? It's not about identifying with I'm not doing enough. It's about noticing that I'm having that thought that I'm not doing enough. And therefore, by putting my attention on that and noticing it, I can set myself an intention with an attitude that might support me. So an intention might be around I'm not doing enough, could be I'll do what I can do in these times and in these hours. And my attitude might be now one of giving, as opposed to I've got to get this because then people are going to look at this and I'm going to be judging. No, I'm going to do what I can, and I'm going to give. And it's about therefore that kind of building up a new habit and focusing on that new habit and allowing us and letting us see where it takes us.
Claire, that sounds to me a little bit like the law of attraction, but that would be attract what we think about. Would that be correct?
Well, I suppose a lot of people think with things like the law of attraction, it can be a bit airy-fairy. And I suppose what I would say about it is that the thing is, our brains, they're designed to attend to what we believe matters. So if we are constantly attending to what we're not doing, we'll get more evidence of that in our lives. In that we'll notice it more because our reticular activating system is putting our attention on that. But if we can change what we're putting our attention on, we can then start to, I suppose, send signals to our reticular activating system, focus on more evidence in our environment and in our working life to show us a bit more of what we can achieve and what we can get done. I'm reminded of that, you know, the gentleman, Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And he talked about being in the concentration camp and having absolutely no choice over, you know, the availability of food, when he could access it, of when they were going to be beaten, of what was going to happen to him. And he said the only choice he had was to waken up every day and to choose to live in that moment and to choose to live every day. And he has a great belief that his expectations, you know, led him to feel and to think and to behave in a way that then supported that experience. So there's something there for us to consider in these unprecedented times, what we want to put our focus on. And I know just now what we think about is impacting on how we feel, and what we are subjected to and what we're privy to and what we're conscious of has a real impact on us at this time. I know that we may be very conscious of our physical diet at this time. My sister sent me a message the other day to say she's actually having to live now in quarantine from her fridge because she seems to be making so many visits to it. But equally, we need to be conscious of the diet of our mind. But we also need, at this time, connection more than ever. It's vital. So, you know, social media and the news, they're not bad necessarily. They're not good or bad, but our usage makes it so. And what I mean by that is how we are using, how we're engaging, how long we're engaging, and the content in which we're engaging in on social media and on the media. We have to be aware of the impact it's having on us, and even the conversations we might be having with colleagues online about how much work they've done and how much work they've achieved and how good they're feeling when we're not feeling good can also impact on us too. An example the other day for me was scrolling down Facebook. I thought I'd have a bit of a brain break from the work I was doing, but 20 minutes later, or was it several hours later, after being on Facebook, I just felt uneasy. I felt kind of anxiety. And it was very much related to the content I'd engaged with. And although I wanted to know more about what was happening, for example, with coronavirus, at that time that was just not supporting me and with the energy that I needed to experience at that particular time and the feelings that I needed to build on and put my attention on to support me as opposed to bring me down. So
I completely understand that, Claire. It's certainly working from home. You are around the television a lot more, and I've found that I cannot bear it watching the news at morning time, at lunchtime, at tea time, or end of work day, and then later in the evening. I really have to limit the intake of news that I have throughout the day. Otherwise, it just makes me feel really quite anxious. I think one thing we do have now is a gift of time, so it's using that time differently rather than just being in front of the telly listening to updates of how bad things are.
And I think that's a good point about what it is we then do with that when we're feeling anxious or we're feeling not so good. And it's about engaging in some of those activities and those kind of things that perhaps we haven't done for a while, and re-engaging with some of our passions and some of the things we just haven't gotten around to. I was chatting to a colleague informally a couple of weeks ago, and she was saying how she's picked up her violin again after however many years. But it's actually therapeutic for her. It allows her just to be in the moment and just to focus on what supports her. I'm seeing an awful lot of videos and photographs of people's baking skills over this time just now, and I think it's just great to see that people are finding other ways to engage in ways that are about their passions and their interests, because that's very important to resource ourselves just now.
Absolutely.
And on that idea of attention and where it takes us, I've always been very interested in this work of Dr. Barbara Fredrickson, and she wrote a book called Positivity, and boy do we need positivity right now, but not the kind of fake and toxic kind. We need the positivity that allows us to focus on who we are as human beings and how that positivity can build us up. So Fredrickson is a neuropsychologist who's carried out a number of studies, particularly regarding what we put our attention on. And she's come up with this theory called broaden and build. And it's based on this idea that positive emotions must have a purpose in the same way that negative emotions had a purpose many, many years ago in order for us to survive. So for us to feel fear was a good thing because it enabled us to get away from that saber-toothed tiger and to survive with our fight or flight mode. But she said, but there must have been a reason too for us to experience positive emotions. And when she's done attentional studies, what she's found is that people, when they have those positive emotions, they physically look up and they look outward. So she calls it the broaden and build idea. And it's this notion that our ancestors, when they felt joy, when they felt hope, when they felt love, optimism, all of these different positive emotions, it allowed them to lift their heads, not be fearful, and to look at what were the possibilities. Now, I realise in a time of uncertainty that can be quite difficult for us to do. But when we engage and put our attention on what we can do, put our attention on what is possible, and put our attention on the passions and interests that we have to take us away from the anxiety and the fearfulness that we may be experiencing about the work we haven't done, it allows us to perhaps take a new direction and to broaden our horizons and build on that as a platform. I like the fact that in her book she talks about recognise and notice what supports you, not focusing on fixing what doesn't. So we may have this idea that I'm not doing enough for my pupils. So what are you doing for your pupils? Focus on that and decide that that's what you're going to put your attention on and to build on that. And she talks about the 3-to-1 positivity ratio. I just thought it was Shirley Clark and Dylan William who'd come up with this. But it is based on the work of Fredrickson and Jonathan Hyde, who looked at our positivity and looked at this idea of if we focus on 3 things that we're doing well, as opposed to the one thing we might want to improve on, it supports us to have an enduring sense of positive well-being. So putting our attention on what works for us as opposed to what doesn't. Because change is really hard. And we've had to go through a change that is imposed, so we've had no control over this, a change that has happened at speed. Our whole lives were turned upside down, as were the lives of our young people and children in our schools over a whole weekend. And we also are going through a change where we're not quite sure there is an end in sight, although I believe today Mr. Swinney has announced that he doesn't expect schools to go back until after the summer. So at least in putting down some marker like that, it gives us some idea of what we may be working with. But it still doesn't take away the anxiety we perhaps have of some of the reaching out to pupils we still want to do, and the worry we carry for some of our children around their own vulnerability. So this tool from John Fisher called the process of transition, or the personal transition curve, I think is a very useful tool. John Fisher is a coach who worked with organisations on this personal transition curve, and he asked them to consider where individuals were within an organisation on how they managed change. And I realise that he was working with organisations, working on changes that perhaps had been discussed and had been foreseen down the line, and how that impacted on individuals. We're living in quite different times. But I wondered if at this particular point we could also take a second poll, and we could just check in with what our predominant emotion is that we're experiencing perhaps this week, or indeed coming back to school or coming back to term in this particular week.
Okay, that's the poll live now, and I'll just close it once we get to a certain percentage of people.
Again, colleagues, if you have any questions for Claire, please feel free to submit those through the question pane.
Okay, we're getting a great response. We're up to 85% of our attendees have voted. And I'm just going to close that poll now. And I'll share the results. So the predominant, the predominant feeling is anxiety with 46%. There's feeling of calm for 33%, lethargy 14%, guilt 6%, and hostility 1%.
Thank you so much for sharing those emotions just now, and sharing where you are with that just now. And hopefully that this transition curve is helpful in looking at some of that. By way of responding to some of those emotions that are felt too, I just want to take you through some kind of ideas as well. Those of us who are feeling anxious just now and anxiety, Paul Mills talked about this last week and talked about those two kind of centres in the brain. I offer some support with this in the slides. I've put in extra slides for the presentation that will be made available tomorrow. And one of them is on those two anxiety centres, main anxiety centres, our amygdala and our prefrontal cortex. Our prefrontal cortex handles a lot of the thoughts around the anxiety that we have, whereas our amygdala is very much associated with the anxiety we may be feeling in our bodies, and we're not quite sure what is really triggering our anxiety on a day-to-day basis. So there are different things that we can do to deal with our different aspects of the anxiety we experience. One book that I found very helpful is Rewiring Your Anxious Brain by Pittman and Carroll. And they talk about how if you've got this anxiety which you're feeling in your body and it's difficult to articulate, then doing physical things like exercise, yoga, getting into our bodies, deep breathing, meditation, these are all really helpful ways to deal with that anxiety. Whereas dealing with our thoughts and the anxious thoughts that we're having, using those reframes, talking to others about some of this, and I'll move on to some of that help that might be available, but talking to others, finding ways to reframe our thoughts, and also writing down, making explicit, labeling and looking at what it is that is making us feel anxiety, because anxiety visits us. It's not who we are. We'll move on to that a little bit later.
Claire, I think what we'll miss just now is the not having the option to go into the next door classroom and chat something through with one of your colleagues. Yeah. It's completely different when you've actively got to pick up the phone to them, or make a time in the day that you're both available. It's not the same. So we will be missing that opportunity to just kind of help each other de-escalate at times when we've got concerns.
Yeah, and it is about finding a virtual way then to turn to that trusted colleague. The trusted colleague you would normally just pop into their classrooms at the end of the day. And sometimes you wouldn't even be talking about the actual thing that was causing you anxiety. You'd be talking about something on TV from the night before or something on Netflix that you'd both been watching. And so it's about finding just a new way of dealing with that. But you're right, it's about connecting and not feeling alone. Those of us who were feeling lethargic, I would say really be kind to yourselves just now and do listen to your body. It may be that you do need more sleep. I've worked with a number of clients over the last 4 years now who have experienced burnout. And one of the things that they talk about a lot is they talk about the spirit was willing, but the flesh was weak. That in fact, physically, they just couldn't get to the work. They just couldn't get to do all that they needed to do or knew what was expected of them because their bodies were just needing that rest. So as much as you can in this time, please continue to listen to your body and do what is possible. But it might be about accepting that this is all that is possible for that particular day and being kind to yourselves. Because the thing is, our emotions are our guidance system. And they allow us to, they allow us to check in with ourselves. Again, you know, like the social media idea, emotions are not necessarily good or bad. It's what we then want to do with them. It's what we want to recognise that, it's what we want to then do with them and how we want to act on what they are telling us. And therefore, looking at how we can mediate some of that with our distractions, with our need for laughter, our need for connection, our need for exercise, bringing all of that into how we as individuals need to balance our lives and not perhaps what we expect others expect of us to do, because that can come and feed into our anxiety hugely. So Fisher focused on these 4 questions as well, and because we are experiencing grief, it comes with any change. And he recognised this in organisations. But the grief that we might be experiencing just now can be much more explicit as we face COVID-19. We may have family members who have faced a loss of a job. There could indeed be loss of life, so sadly, in our school communities and indeed in our own communities and families. Or it could be that we're experiencing a loss of role, a loss of purpose, or a loss of routine just now. Recognising what we lose from change is very important and enables us to label and to be explicit about, this is what is happening for us just now, but also recognising what we're gaining from this and the possibilities and the changes that may be for the better for us as well. So I wondered if this was an exercise that could be used with your teams. It might be something you want to share with your colleagues and use on a weekly basis. You know, if we have a team meeting, if you want to check in with each other, it might be quite a useful resource to do so. Because our reality is that this whole situation is something that we've had to accept. And acceptance as a practice can be really helpful and really useful in supporting our well-being. But I think it's also important to recognise what acceptance is not as much as what acceptance is. And what acceptance is about acknowledging that this is the way things are for now and not forever. And I know we're hearing a lot about going back to, when we get out of this and coming out of the lockdown, going back to what will be normal again. I don't know if it will be normal ever again. And people now are talking about this idea of the new normal. So what would that look like for me as a teacher, as a school leader, going back into my school and into my setting? How will things have changed for me? What I am seeing and the conversations that I'm having with individuals just now is that people are looking at what might a healthier work-life balance mean to me? And also, if I can do so much of this online, what are the possibilities to support me with my working back in the classroom? And how can I get a balance of both in the way that I will work going forward? Also here, supporting us and perhaps changing our attitudes, there's just been a plethora, just an outpouring of kindness from teachers and school leaders up and down the country towards school communities, absolutely without a doubt. And what's also astonishing to see is the way in which our political parties have come together as well. There seems to be a greater compassion and kindness right across the board. and we are finding ways to respond to each other differently. That's not to say, though, that things aren't difficult, and acceptance is not about putting up with things that are abusive, that are violent towards us as individuals, or indeed towards our vulnerable children. And I suppose what I would want to say at this particular point is that I always offer every single client that I work with an initial free consultation of about 30 to 45 minutes. And what I would like to offer online just now for any of the participants who are listening in just now, I am more than happy to take a call from you, which will be free, which would last, say, 30 to 45 minutes over the coming weeks. If you feel anxious, out of control, if there's anything I can do to support you with that, please just pick up the phone. If I don't get back to you immediately, I will get back to you within those 24 hours. Because I think it's about recognising what you're also not prepared to put up with ongoing feelings or any situation that you feel you would like some support with. There'll also be some helplines towards the end of the slides as well. So just something to make you aware of.
Thanks for highlighting that, Claire. That's very kind of you.
No, not at all. It's I always give that, so it's always there if people do need that. So although times are uncertain, we still waking up every day with a sense of mission. And although that might be quite cloudy just now, and we might find it difficult to focus on what the particular mission is that day, and the goals to achieve it might be different every day, we're still called and we still know that we want to help and that we want to make a difference. The difficulty can be getting clarity on that. So whether we're working in our hubs or whether we're working at home, every day I would suggest getting up and deciding what it is today that is your mission. Be clear on it and remind yourself every day that this is what is driving you today. If your mission that day is to make a difference to your pupils by reaching out to just one of those pupils online or sending a letter or doing something just specific, then that is terrific, because that's the start, and that's about building that focus on the positivity with what we want to move forward with. And I'm hearing great stories, about teachers and leaders, and they're doing great things out in the communities by delivering meals to our vulnerable families, but we might not have the possibility of doing that with our own underlying health issues or with our own capacity to support in that way at this particular time. And we can get caught up sometimes in feeling guilt that we're not fulfilling that role. But this is exactly where we have to be right now. And therefore, from where you are right now, what is your mission? What do you want to do that enables you to fulfill that mission from your workspace within your home? And how does that relate to a deeper sense of who you are? And because the stories that we tell ourselves are very important. What we tell ourselves every day provides us with a personal resource. It provides us with that story that's going to support us in moving forward. If I get up every day with the story of, well, I don't make a difference, what's the point in all of this? It's a real difference in energy from the story that I tell myself when I get up and I say, I can make the difference today to that particular pupil or that particular family just by reaching out and just by contacting them. We are governed, it seems just now, by a story which is stay home, protect the NHS and save lives. That's a story we're all bound to, and my well-being is bound up with your well-being. So that story just now is what is driving us all with the lockdown that has been imposed on us. So how do we use our lockdown experience to still resource ourselves to fulfill the mission we wish to carry out in the best way that we possibly can from the place we are working from? What's lovely as well is the stories that we're hearing in the media that can also give us signs of hope and positivity. I love that story from Jacinda Ardern, who told a press conference that she wanted to reassure everyone that the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy were still essential workers. So that was a lovely story for our young people to instill them with that hope. Nice, eh?
Mm-hmm.
Also, I saw this news headline, doctors wearing photos of themselves smiling to ease patients. Despite the lack of visuals and that human touch and that human connection, our facial connections, The doctors wanted to connect in the best way, second best way that they possibly could, with the photographs of themselves smiling. Our smiles are so important to enable us to connect, and that's why we talk about the physical distancing perhaps rather than the social distancing. So good to smile. It helps us all, makes us all feel connected and safe. So what are the stories that you're noticing that you're telling yourself at this time? And what's the story that's going to resource you in the best way possible and allow you to give yourself hope, connect with others, and to have that compassion shared with others as well? Because I think compassion is necessary for ourselves, with one another, for one another, and for ourselves. And back to the work of this lady, Barbara Fredrickson. She carried out something called the Open Heart Study in 2008. And what she wanted to do was to carry out an ancient loving kindness meditation that Tibetan Buddhist monks have been carrying out for thousands of years. And what she'd found with the work with Tibetan monks and the research that had been done with them was the lack of depression, the increased physical vitality and positive emotions that they experienced. And she wanted to see if this could be done with ourselves working in our own societies. So she asked participants to take part in a 20-minute loving kindness meditation every single day. And it starts off by focusing on yourself, where you say to yourself 3 times, may I be filled with loving kindness. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be safe. May I be free from all suffering. So you say that 3 times. You then do the same for a loved one, the same for a neutral person. So that could be someone you met on your daily walk, said hello to, and met at the shop and said hello to. You then go through the same process for a challenging person. Can I just say at this point, Sharon, your challenging person and your loved one might be the same person at this particular time, especially if you're all cooped up in the same house.
Very likely.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with a double dose of the loving kindness meditation.
Very helpful.
You also can go through this with all sentient beings. And I think what I've heard from, and I've done this meditation a lot in some of the sessions that I've done out at the Restoration Yard and also in schools, what I hear back from practitioners is the help it's given them and the help it's also given some of their pupils. Had some great reports from teachers who'd use it with their pupils in providing their pupils with a sense of calm and ease. But what is overwhelmingly the case when I've done this with people is their sense of connectedness and the feeling of, if I'm putting my intention, my thoughtful intention out there towards others, then it's also a way to soothe myself and to maybe know that I am connecting with them, and gives us a sense of hope. So last couple of slides here just now, and just this kind of last tool, developing that self-compassion as a practice. Sometimes it can, again, it's like what you were saying earlier about law of attraction and compassion and this idea of self-compassion. Sometimes for us it can seem a bit airy-fairy, because I think as educators we're very focused on results and getting the outcomes. But in fact, it's not always so linear, is it? And there's something here about self-compassion as a practice and as something, as a tool that can support us to get into a better feeling place. Now, I say this not on the basis of it being airy-fairy, but on the basis of research and of a concept that has been studied. Kristen Neff has a very good website, and she's a psychologist who has, and a therapist who's worked with a number of people on this and with a number of scientists on this. And there's a study by O'Leary in 2006 on developing self-compassion, where they looked at self-compassion as a concept and the 3 components of it. And the 3 components of self-compassion are asking ourselves these 3 questions about what my best friend would say about a situation that I find myself in, which I found difficult, where I feel guilty or I feel maybe anxious about that I'm doing the wrong thing. Recognizing that it may have happened to others and connecting with others. And then being mindful and labeling my thoughts and emotions that I'm going through at this time. Because what I may be feeling today will be different from what I maybe feel tomorrow or the end of the week or indeed into next week. Your thoughts and your feelings do not stay the same. They're always changing. And I heard on the Headspace app this idea of our thoughts and feelings, they pass by like clouds on a summer's day. It's about becoming an observer of our thoughts and our feelings, and recognising that we are not our thoughts and feelings, but that they tell us and they give us signals as to what is happening for us just now, to allow us to then take action to do things differently and to support ourselves in different ways. So if we are making judgments of ourselves that we're useless because we're not as productive, or we're lazy because we're not as because we're more lethargic, it's about using those questions to find a reframe and to support us with that, because it's just what it is just now, but we can maybe apply some of this to take ourselves to different thoughts and feelings that can resource us in a better way. Just lastly, some helplines, as I say, that offer. There's no restriction on that offer, Sharon. That offer is unlimited for me to be in touch with anyone, or anyone to get in touch with me for a 30, 45-minute free session, just to chat through any anxieties and worries in these coming months. And there are some other great resources. CAMS have got some great resources, not just for teachers, but for teachers and pupils as well. And it might be helpful for families too. I've got things on Facebook. I've got some things on my own website. So just, yeah, it's all there. So thanks so much for having me today. It's been great.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful, Claire. Thank you so much for your input there. We've now reached the question and answer section of today's webinar, so if anyone has any questions that they would like to submit, please do so very quickly. We've actually only got a couple of minutes. I would like to start with our first question from Kirsty, who is saying, what if you're finding it too overwhelming to notice how you're feeling, to then be able to take the steps outlined to change it?
Yeah, oh yeah, it's really good. That's probably relates to that slide about noticing your thoughts and the intention. And again, it goes back to that idea of experiencing that stress, experiencing that anxiety and where it's coming from. Sometimes the best thing that we can do is just to get into our bodies if we're feeling that overwhelm. And I would suggest going for a walk, or doing something that distracts us, or doing something physical then that gets us into our bodies at that particular time. What I would then suggest, and it might sound a bit odd, but I'd then suggest you coming back to that place where you were experiencing a bit of that overwhelm with that thought, and think, right, what's changed, if anything? And if not, keep going back to being in your body. If it's a walk, exercise, getting online, and noticing how it shifts, how long it takes to shift, and supporting yourself in that way. That's my kind of initial response to that.
Okay, thank you. One more quick question from Joseph, who would like to know, why do we still talk about change, external factors that we cannot control, and not transformation as in inner ones?
Oh, that's wonderful. Joseph's on his way. That is wonderful. That's so good, actually. That yeah, it's that whole idea of the kind of terrain that we're having to deal with, that external landscape. Oh, sorry, the terrain is the external and the kind of inner landscape. So focusing on that inner landscape is absolutely right. Because you're right, it's about the relationship we have with that external, and therefore looking at how our internal landscape and how we can change some of that in our relationship to that external, which can bring about that transformation to support us and to relate to it in a way that doesn't frighten us, doesn't increase our anxiety, but soothes us. Yes. Great question.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the rest of the questions that we have are either directly for GTCS, and there's one question directly for yourself, Claire, that we will forward on to you. So certainly. Fraser, Claire, thanks very much. I'll pass this over to Fraser.
Yes, thanks very much, Claire and Sharon, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. If you have any other questions, please contact communications@gtcs.org.uk. That's communications@gtcs.org.uk. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we'd appreciate if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You will also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. Other resources from Claire will be available on our website in the Health and Wellbeing Hub, along with resources from other specialists working alongside GTC Scotland. On behalf of GTC Scotland, Claire, Sharon and myself, thank you for joining us today, and please enjoy your evening. Thank you.